It was a striking design, which immediately became a favourite with fans, or indeed anybody who appreciates aesthetics. It was the car that represented a new era of sports car racing in North America, but at first it was not exactly a success. This is the story of the Mazda RT24-P and the Riley MkXXX. Mazda had been contesting the American Le Mans series for many years with a rotary-engined Courage and later a petrol, diesel and then petrol again Lola. However, ahead of the 2017 season, neither Lola or the American Le Mans series existed anymore, and Mazda needed a new car. The new IMSA Sports Car Championship had absorbed what was left of the American Le Mans series and the Grand Am series, and it was replacing its top prototype class with a new rulebook to replace both the tube frame Daytona prototypes of the Grand Am series and also the LMP1 cars of the American Le Mans series. The new cars would be called Daytona Prototype International, or DPi for short. At the same time these rules were being introduced, the ACO in France was making controversial changes to the LMP2 category. The ACO believed that it was not sustainable for car manufacturers to compete in LMP2 with just one or two customers, so it restricted the class to just 4 chassis makers. This essentially banned cars like the Dome S103, as well as those from HPD and BR Engineering from taking part. These new LMP2 rules would cost cap a complete car and restrict the electronics and the engine, though there was still some freedom on the gearbox with both Hewland and X-Track offering designs. All new LMP2 cars would have to use the Gibson, previously known as Zytec, GK428 engine, a 4.2 litre normally aspirated V8. The engine was largely designed around the architecture of the older Zytec ZG348, which was also developed into the ZA348 engine used in A1 Grand Prix. Indeed, the overall engine's roots could be traced all the way back to the Panos LMP07 V8. The new IMSA DPi class would be based on LMP2 chassis from the new ACO list of approved suppliers, just those 4 companies, although the class allowed manufacturers to rebody the LMP2 cars and fit their own engines, to give the cars a bit of manufacturer identity. So you could conceivably describe DPi as an LMP2 car with a new engine and some shiny bits stuck on it. Mazda was one of the first, if not the first manufacturer to commit to this new class, but to compete in DPi, it would need a completely new car, and that car would have to use an approved LMP2 chassis. Mazda's longtime partner, which had kept the old Lola chassis going, Multimatic, was very interested. Indeed, it had long contemplated building a new LMP2 car under the Lola brand to replace the B0880 and B0860 cars. But that never happened. When it was announced that there would only be 4 chassis approved for use in LMP2 and DPi starting from the 2017 season, it was clear that NASCAR, owners of the IMSA Championship, would likely insist on at least one North American manufactured car being selected, alongside French companies Ligier and Oreca, as well as a chassis from Dallara in Italy. Realistically, the number of companies capable of designing and building a modern LMP2 car in North America was a pretty limited field, with Riley a leading force in Daytona prototypes, but perhaps not at the cutting edge in terms of its composite chassis technology, and Multimatic, which absolutely was, but was from Canada and not North Carolina. Those 2 companies were likely the favourites, so combining their efforts did make some sort of sense. Riley itself had actually previously proposed both LMP1 and LMP2 designs for manufacturing, but couldn't find any customers, so neither project had actually been completed. Interestingly, this graphic used to illustrate the new DPi rules, and used by some publications at the time of the announcement, actually used a Lola chassis and bodywork as its basis. Perhaps another hint at that lost Lola LMP2 car. Anyway, the areas of the car in dark blue here could be changed by manufacturers to give them that brand identity, while the light green and dark green sections would be taken from the LMP2 homologated designs. The work on the new Mazda would be split between both Riley Technologies and Multimatic. Multimatic would do the composite chassis, likely calling on some of that initial work done on the never finished but contemplated Lola LMP2, as well as the underbody of the car, the aerodynamics, as well were a joint project on the LMP2 version of the car, while Multimatic did the aero and bodywork exclusively on the Mazda version, while Riley did the complete mechanical package for both cars. Perhaps the Mazda differed to the others in this respect. It could be said that two of the selected 2017 chassis suppliers, Oracle and Ligier, designed LMP2 cars first and foremost, and those cars were then adapted for use in DPi. But the Riley Multimatic, and perhaps to a lesser extent the Dallara, were designed as a DPi first and foremost, even though an LMP2 version was a requirement of the rules. One thing was clear: the new bodywork on the car had to look like a Mazda. While the Lola project for Mazda was a great success, the car didn't look like a Mazda, and the new DPi rules allowed for quite a lot of freedom in terms of the way the car did actually look. So to achieve this, Mazda's stylists set about coming up with a concept for the new car. It wouldn't actually be the first time that they'd penned a new body for a Le Mans prototype. The Mazda Furai was based on that old rotary-powered Courage C65. We'll have to get back to that. The new sketches for the car perhaps didn't look like that much at first. Certainly not a modern racing car, just a vague, if aesthetically pleasing, swooping shape. However, note the cutouts behind the front wheel pod and the shark fin. These concepts were then evolved a little more into a couple of variants of concept sketches, which this time actually included the wheels of the car, and perhaps a little bit more attention to the reality of a race car design, including a stylised rear wing. These concepts in turn were matured into this really quite striking car concept, which followed Mazda's Kodo design philosophy apparently. This concept rendering incorporated some real car elements, such as the fuel filler, the exhaust exit, the rear wing, and the engine air inlet on top of the cockpit. It still appeared to lack doors, however. Note the shape of the mirrors. Multimatic and Riley had to take these sketches and turn them into a viable car design that met the technical regulations, and also allowed drivers to actually get in and out of the car. Slowly, the design evolved from those early concept sketches into a proper CAD model that largely met the regulations, and this render here is based on that. The proper CAD model of the car again looked a lot more conventional, and it was put together with Riley Technologies' mechanical package from the LMP2 car factored in, which is why it looks quite so different to the concept sketches. While it was a shape that was perhaps not quite as dramatic as the stylists first conceived when they sketched their concepts, it was a viable car. The chassis was designed around a Mazda 4-cylinder engine, but also a twin-turbo V6 or V8 was considered on top of that. The LMP2 specification Gibson V8 installation was actually a secondary consideration. Interestingly, the wheelbase was fixed by regulation, meaning that the car was perhaps a little bit longer than Riley would have designed if it were not for those regulations. Note that the mandatory front wheel holes have been relocated from the inner edge of the front wheel pod, which we saw in those late concept sketches, to the more conventional point on top of the front wheel arches. At this point in late 2016, the car was revealed to the public at the LA Auto Show, and the response to its design was overwhelmingly positive. The public and racing fans loved the way the new car looked, and its name was also revealed, the Mazda RT24-P. However, work on the car's bodywork hadn't actually stopped at this point. Extensive CFD development was undertaken before a scale model was made and tested in the Lola wind tunnel in England. Work was also much later done in the Catesby wind tunnel in the UK, even though Mazda by that point was no longer in competition, curiously, and we'll have to get back to that. In terms of the aerodynamics, there was a joint project, as I mentioned, between Riley and Multimatic, with a wind tunnel model designed by Multimatic but actually built by Riley. From Multimatic's side, Mark Handford led the project, a familiar name to some, perhaps because of his Handford device used in the kart championship in ovals. His main role was to develop the Mazda version of the car, but he was also involved in the LMP2 Riley iteration. However, the car's aerodynamic development was a little unconventional in that it could not be designed to deliver the ultimate aerodynamic performance. The DPi rules established a baseline model all based around a generic car design, of which a model was developed and tested in one of the wind tunnels at Williams F1. All DPi cars would then be tested in the exact same wind tunnel at the same scale to ensure that they had similar levels of drag and downforce to the generic model. The Mazda, of course, was tested accordingly. Later, all of the actual cars were tested at the full-scale wind shear tunnel in North Carolina. There was a rumour that this process was quietly designed to ensure that none of the new cars exceeded 200 miles per hour at Daytona, but that was strongly denied by NASCAR and IMSA. The first public test for the new Mazda DPi came at Daytona in late 2016 after running privately at Road Atlanta. That was followed up by the official Raw Before the 24 test at Daytona in early 2017. That test gave everyone a really good chance to look over the mechanical package of the car for the first time. It also gave everybody a first look at the new Riley Mark 30. The Mark 30 was the LMP2 version of the Mazda. It used its own Riley Technologies developed bodywork, and it was powered by the spec Gibson V8 used by all LMP2 cars. Inside the Mazda team, the Riley Mark 30 was sometimes slightly unkindly called the Lego car, as the bodywork looked like it was made from those Danish plastic bricks. But that car was designed for its aerodynamic performance, not for its looks, while the Mazda was indeed designed for its looks ahead of its aerodynamic performance. Looking under the bodywork of the Mazda, you can see the front bulkhead layout, which is actually slightly unconventional in that it has a stepped section underneath the nose bodywork, with the inboard front suspension sitting on top of that sort of shelf on top of the tub. This layout was of course shared with the Riley. Looking at the bare tub in this later image, you can really see that stepped front bulkhead very clearly. I can't think of any other cars that have a similar design to this. Here's a look at the front suspension and how it picks up on the chassis. This picture is of the Riley version of the car, but the design was identical on the Mazda. It's interesting to note how the springs and dampers are separated in this layout. At the rear of the car, the Mazda was fitted with a turbocharged 2-litre inline 4-cylinder engine designed and built by AER. Under the DPi rules, engine performance would be balanced in the same way that aerodynamics were, giving car manufacturers quite a lot of freedom in terms of their engine configurations. In theory, all of the engines should be production-based and built by the manufacturer responsible for the entry and the bodywork. This would mean that the little Mazda 4-cylinder engine could be tuned to produce 600 brake horsepower, and as such was able to match Cadillac's 5.5-litre V8 and Nissan's 3.8-litre twin-turbo V6, as well as the LMP2 Gibson engine. When this family of Mazda engines was first introduced, it was called the Mazda MZRR, and it was suggested to be based on production Mazda engine at the time, but in reality it was a bespoke racing engine. Looking into it, I believe that that engine can actually be traced back to the 4-cylinder AER P41, which itself was based on the structure of AER's 3.6-litre twin-turbo P32T V8 engine. Essentially, the Mazda 4-cylinder could be considered to be half of that old V8. The P41 has evolved through numerous development iterations, concluding at the P91. However, the final iteration of the Mazda 4-cylinder, the P91B, is claimed by the AER website as being based on a specific application designed for a Formula One manufacturer. It featured a gear-driven valve train, barrel throttle drive-by-wire, and an advanced direct injection system. The Mazda engine was also notably lighter than the Gibson engine, so the RT24-P had to carry a little ballast to make up for that, although the Mazda engine did have a higher centre of gravity than any of the V8s used in DPi. That 4-cylinder engine would drive the rear wheels of the car via an X-Track 6-speed sequential transmission. In DPi and indeed in LMP2, it was really a straight choice between Hewland and X-Track, and Riley Technologies opted for the latter. At that first test of the 2017 season, the Mazda featured a couple of different exhaust layouts, with one car using a side exit ahead of the left rear wheel, the other used a periscope exhaust on the left-hand side of the engine cover, with the latter layout being the version finally homologated for racing. The old exhaust opening was then blanked off and ultimately covered with the scoring numbers on the side of the car. However, on the Riley, the side exhaust exits remained in place. Looking at the nose of the car, it's interesting to see that the front impact structure peeks out through that open and stylized nose on the front of the Mazda. It is, of course, the same shape as the nose on the Riley, but on that car the nose is fully exposed. The side panels on the Mazda are quite neat, a bit of styling meeting a bit of aerodynamics perhaps. Comparing them to the version on the Riley Mark 30 is also quite an interesting exercise. The Riley has the same general concept, but not exactly. In later seasons, the Riley version was modified with another additional small element, another variant of which was also seen on the car at times. In LMP2, all cars shared identical electronic systems from Cosworth, but in DPi there was a bit more freedom. So the Mazda used a combined Life Racing and Motec system instead, while the Riley was forced to use the Cosworth system. This extended to the Mazda version of the car using a bespoke steering wheel and control systems. That steering wheel, seen here, was later modified by one of the drivers who found it a bit uncomfortable in longer runs, so he fitted some tennis grips to it. A nice little touch. I don't think it lasted. The debut race for the cars was the 2017 Daytona 24 Hours, and it's fair to say that that race didn't exactly go well for the Mazdas. The cars qualified last in the prototype class, with the Mazdas in 9th and 10th and the sole Riley MkXXX in 11th and last position. One of the two Mazdas retired from the race with a clutch failure, while the other caught fire and was out as well. The Riley, though, actually led the race overall for 39 laps and finished overall in 3rd position. But that would be a high point for the Riley MkXXX. At Sebring, all three cars hit trouble, and at Long Beach, the 3rd race of the year, the Riley was written off in a pre-race crash. Another Riley chassis had been sent to Le Mans to contend the 24 Hours. There had been a suggestion that the DPi cars could have been allowed to race at Le Mans, but this was later blocked, and any IMSA team wanting to race a car at Le Mans would have to convert their DPi car into full LMP2 spec, complete with the baseline bodywork and the Gibson engine. Later, the LMDH rules were created, which form today part of the hypercar class in the WEC, and these rules are essentially based on the DPi rules, but none of this happened in time for Mazda. For Le Mans, the LMP2 manufacturers could introduce a low drag body kit. The Riley version featured clip-on extensions to the front wheel pods, which you can see here. Note how abrupt the rear edge of the front wheel pods is. That was both on the low drag version and the high downforce version of the car. Here is some nice 3D printed detail on the inside of the cooling ducts on the rear wheel pod. Looking at the side panel of the car, this was again revised for Le Mans. The additional element behind the front wheel seen at Daytona returned, while a long plate above the side opening was added to the car. A new lower drag rear wing was also added to the car with revised end plate. You can see the extensions at the top of those sections here. However, despite the changes, the Riley wasn't really well suited to Le Mans. The car seemingly had a bit too much drag, and it was the slowest LMP2 in the speed traps. The car also lacked cornering speed too. Its apex speeds weren't very good, suggesting it was too far down on downforce as well, and there was a suggestion in the paddock that the car was a little bit overweight on top of that. The car did finish the Le Mans 24 Hours in 2017, albeit 55 laps down on the leader. In fact, the 2017 season was not great overall for either the Riley or the Mazda versions of the car. Despite a few podium finishes, none of the three cars which started the season got to the end of it. The Visit Florida racing team replaced its Riley with a Ligier before the end of the year after a string of crashes and reliability issues with their Mark 30. And while a Riley Mark 30 did contest the 2018 Daytona 24 Hours, it wasn't really competitive, and the Mark 30 never raced again. Mazda also had significant issues with its version of the car. There were cooling problems with the transmission, and a suspension component failed in testing at Daytona. Indeed, there was a growing friction between Multimatic and Riley over the reliability and development of the cars. The Mazda version seemed to be somewhat undercooled, and some parts of the car were not as durable as expected. Eventually, Multimatic took charge of the car's development. Before the end of the season, it was announced that the Speed Source team, which had been running the Mazdas up until this point, was to be replaced by German outfit Team Joest. This is the same team which had run the Works Audis at Le Mans for many years with record-breaking success, although at this point the Mazdas were withdrawn from the final races of the 2017 IMSA season. A couple of the cars were then shipped to Germany for Joest to inspect, and the Germans, what they found, well, they weren't that impressed with it. A program to develop and upgrade the car was launched, but there was an issue. In DPi and in LMP2, the cars were homologated, meaning that the design was locked in for the duration of the car's competition life. However, each manufacturer could use one upgrade joker during the life of the car, although what that upgrade joker actually meant, well, nobody really seemed to know, as nobody at that point had ever used a joker. Crucially, the car couldn't be made to be much faster than its performance box. Essentially, all the upgrade could do was make the car more reliable and more raceable, and as close as possible to the performance of the Eureka 07, as that had become the baseline chassis. In another link to the British manufacturer, former Lola engineer Julian Soule was put in charge of the upgrade, and he found a number of areas of the car to improve. The reliability of the electrical system was greatly improved, and its weight was reduced by as much much as 10 kilograms just by tidying up the wiring harnesses on the car and repositioning some of the electronic boxes. 10 kilograms sounds like a lot, but when you look at this wiring in the cockpit of the 2017 car, you can actually see how messy it really was. Sol also found that the car indeed was undercooled. He found that the radiators in the car were much smaller than those that he had designed into the Lola B0860 when that car was fitted with the same Mazda engine. Indeed, they were only around 70% of the same surface area as used in the Lola. And worse, the ducting to those coolers was partially obstructed by the turbo inlet, so the engine itself was really quite undercooled. As a result of this, the radiators were resized and the ducting was completely changed, but Sol found that the larger cooler that he felt he needed to use wouldn't actually fit underneath the bodywork, so he had to angle it and sculpt it into the cooling ducts. It was actually also found that the entire cooling ducts layout was completely blocked as well by fluid connections to the transmission, so eventually the whole side pod layout of the car had to be redesigned. You can see the top of the original vertically mounted cooler in this image, and here you can see the new angled version designed by Julian Sol. Angling that radiator was essential as it was the only way to increase the cooling surface area without changing that bodywork substantially. There were also additional cooling slots added to the upper surface of the bodywork. The suspension layout also had to be completely reworked at the rear of the car, with the springs and dampers repositioned, which again saved weight and also improved the overall stiffness at the rear. On the 2017 version of the car, the springs and dampers were mounted in a transverse arrangement across the car. You can just see them here. But on the 2018 updated version of the car, they were rotated through 90 degrees, as you can see here. It's a big change. At the front of the car, the changes were a bit more limited, as the suspension mounting points were essentially defined by the monocoque, and changing that would be too big a change for a simple joker. It would have essentially meant that a completely new car had to be designed. New headlights, though, were part of the 2018 package. Compare the old designs here to the new versions here. As the upgrade joker also applied to the LMP2 car to an extent, it too benefited from the changes to the rear suspension, as you can see here on the 2018 specification Riley. The revised car was tested extensively in Europe at the Hockenheim circuit in Germany and also at Donington Park in the UK, as well as in the USA at Daytona and other venues. The official launch of the 2018 specification Mazda RT24-P came at the LA Auto Show in 2017, although the official imagery of the 2018 specification car seemed to actually be a pre-launch 2016 version of the car with the old side exhaust exits. Initially, the upgraded Mazda and the new team running the car didn't seem to make a great difference in 2018, and the car continued to struggle with its reliability, but it did again score 3 podiums during that season. However, things started to come really good in 2019 with 3 race wins, and the car was becoming truly competitive. Although 2020 was to be a difficult year, and not for the reasons that you might be thinking of. Amid rumours of some disagreements about how the programme was operated, the German team Joest parted company with Mazda, and Multimatic stepped in to run the car that it was already developing and designing. Despite this, the Mazdas took 2 wins that season, including at the Sebring 12 Hours. In 2021, there were also 2 wins for Mazda. One came at Watkins Glen, and there was an emotional final win at Petit Le Mans at the end of the season. However, Mazda had announced at the start of the year that it would be quitting the top level of sports car racing at the end of the 2021 season, and it didn't intend to compete in the new LMDH category, which of course was largely based on the DPi rules. Between 2017 and 2021, the Riley MkXXX and the Mazda RT24-P contested 56 races and won 7 of them. At least 9 chassis were built. Chassis 1, 3, 7, 8 and 9 were all Mazdas, while chassis 2, 5 and 6 were all built up as Rileys, though chassis 2, the one that finished 3rd at Daytona in 2017, was essentially destroyed in a crash the same year. Interestingly, it would of course be possible to build any of the chassis into either a Riley or a Mazda and convert one into the other, which raises the question of what is the true identity of this chassis. Is it the RT24-P or the Mark 30. And this question of chassis being interchangeable between identities is one that's becoming incredibly tricky in the LMDH era, with multiple brands building their cars up around the same basic monocoque. Perhaps the Porsche 963 could be seen as the true successor to the Mazda. It utilises a Multimatic chassis, a chassis which was developed having applied some of the lessons learned in the development of the RT24-P and the Riley MkXXX. It's also interesting to consider that had the chassis been branded a Lola as Multimatic at one point contemplated, then perhaps Lola would have supplied the Porsche 963 with its monocoque, which would not have been the first time that Lola had supplied a Porsche Le Mans car with its chassis. Our final aside for now is the Multimatic chassis sat forgotten in Audi's storage facility, part of the never completed Audi LMDH project, and we'll have to get back to that. If you've enjoyed this identity shifting tale of North American sports cars, then don't forget to hit like and subscribe. For now though, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon somewhere on pit road.